My sophomore world literature class is studying the nonfiction book Farewell to Manzanar, written by Jeannie Wakasuki Houston and her husband James D. Houston. It's the story of the Japanese-American internments at Manzanar, California during World War II. 2017 is the 17th anniversary of the camps established after the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor and started a war against the United States. Students used a collaborative group technique called literature circles to study the novel and produce a poster depicting their assigned chapters. We used 4 people per group and 4 literature circles roles: discussion director who develops questions for the chapter, literary luminary who finds excerpts and quotations, illustrator who develops artwork to represent the chapters, and the summarizer who develops a summary of the chapters. Where there are 5 students in a group, we added the connector who looks for contemporary or personal events that reflect a character or event in the book. All the work is placed on the poster's storyboard. A shooting script is developed, and the final step in the process is to videotape all the posters in chronological order to create a video living version of the book. Many of the hardships the Wakasukis and all the internees suffered were described in 2 recent articles in the Riverside Press Enterprise newspaper commemorating the event. Brian Calle wrote a piece titled "Dark Stain on U.S. History" as part of the 75th anniversary of Executive Order 9066, which implemented the Japanese-American internment camps across the western United States, especially the Manzanar camp in Northern California. Calle wrote, "This year the internments is a particularly sensitive subject, not only because it is the 75th anniversary of the heinous order, but also because the use of executive orders has once again become a national issue. At the time of this writing, a federal district court judge in Hawaii had blocked the implementation of an executive order limiting travel to the United States by people living in 6 Middle East countries. According to our president, the order was written to protect national security, just like the internment order during World War II. Calle writes, "The internment order of World War II itself was born of fear and was sold to the American people as national security and military necessity. But a federal commission, the Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians, later concluded that the actual motivation was race, prejudice, war hysteria, and a failure of political leadership. In fact, not one spy or saboteur was ever found in the intern camps during World War II." In another article in the Press Enterprise titled "Life-Altering Impact," Stephanie Bayer wrote, "Some imprisoned Japanese Americans killed themselves. Many couldn't find jobs. Others lost their homes, and children were ostracized in school. And many stopped speaking Japanese altogether and struggled with their self-image, striving to prove their Americanness and worth as human beings out of a fear they would be locked up because of their ethnicity." Jeannie Wakasuki narrates the story as a young girl who grows into a young woman during World War II. She describes life in 1942 as good, with her father's trade as a commercial fisherman working out of Long Beach and selling to French's Van Camp's cannery and having 2 fishing boats. Her family had a home in Long Beach. The story opens as she and her mother and the other wives and children are seeing their husbands and fathers sail off to fish, but suddenly they return unexpectedly instead. All the ships were called back and prohibited from ever fishing again. They were considered threats to national security, especially to the Long Beach Naval Station. Executive Order 9066 provided that her family and all Japanese Americans similarly situated were to be relocated to inland internment camps. The Wakasukis were relocated to the Manzanar camp in Northern California. They could take 1 suitcase. Mr. Wakasuki was arrested on a charge that was never proven, and he was released early from prison as a result. Jeannie wrote, "In December of 1941, Papa's disappearance didn't bother me nearly as much as the world I soon found myself in. That world included the wooden barracks they lived in that were barren, had no cooking, and no cleaning facilities. The holes between the wooden planks, hastily constructed, let in the wind and the dirt. We woke early, writes Jeannie, shivering and coated with dust that had blown up through the knotholes and doorway. At Manzanar, the Wakasuki family unit soon begins to fall apart as the children prefer to eat with friends in the camp's mess hall. The housing units did not provide stoves to cook or refrigerators to store food. There were no tables to sit at. Upwards to 6 or 8 families would be cramped into one barracks building with no partitions to separate them and provide some privacy. Jeannie wrote, "Before Manzanar, mealtime had always been the center of our family scene." The summarizer writes, "Before Manzanar, mealtime was family time, and they would all spend time together. But now children and adults are split up." Her mother begins to afford a storage unit, working at 2 jobs, so Jeannie became friends with 2 Catholic nuns. The last 2 chapters are about her father, who is a rude, prideful man. Jeannie's father was imprisoned in Colorado but released early because the authorities never had any evidence of an offense or evidence tying him to an offense. However, a rumor spreads through Manzanar camp that he was released early because he was an informer, a hated Innu. He begins to withdraw from everyone and begins drinking a lot out of shame. Group 3 summarizer wrote, Chapter 8 begins with Jeannie explaining how people would whisper about her father being drunk all the time. He was out of control and one day threatened to hurt his wife. In panic, her younger brother Kyo punches her father in the face. The food at the camps was cooked by inexperienced cooks and often grew rotten. Soon many people were sick all the time from eating contaminated food. As a result, frustration mounted and protests occurred and left people dead and injured. Jeannie describes life at Manzanar eventually settling down around 1943 into a more comfortable routine. There were improvements made in many areas by the residents, like vegetable gardens and ornamental gardens. Schools were built, including a high school with a yearbook. Kids were enjoying a new dance craze, jitterbugging, and there were bobby soxers, softball, and bands. There were more activities for Jeannie to do, and Papa, as she called him, developed an interest in art, especially in drawing the surrounding mountains. A Manzanar apple tree uprooted in the camp and crashed into a barracks, which resulted in the Wakasuki family getting a new barracks, which doubled their living space. Jeannie describes the ache she has felt since being taken to Manzanar beginning to hurt less. The hospital at Manzanar was so bad that people died from its negligence. Jeannie's sister-in-law hemorrhaged during a miscarriage and bled to death from a lack of blood supply at the hospital. But when Jeannie's sister went in to have her baby, the family leaped for joy at the safe delivery of her child. In one of the rare occasions in her life, Jeannie sees her parents' joy at the birth. "I was a spectator," she wrote, "witnessing the nearest to a love scene I would ever see between them, as her parents took a walk by themselves out to the firebreak area of the camp to savor their happiness." As the war grinds on, the family loses more members as some move away after finding jobs or are drafted in the military service. Woody, the eldest son, is drafted and eager to go to war. Some 500 people from the camp gather to watch their men leave Manzanar to become members of the famous 442nd Combat Regiment of Japanese American soldiers who gained fame for their bravery fighting in Europe. In 1944, legal challenges to Executive Order 9066 reached the United States Supreme Court, which overrules and ends the order, holding that the government cannot detain loyal citizens against their will. Internment had ended. The Wakasukis need to leave the camp immediately and start over from scratch. They are fearful of racism, and they hear stories of violence against Japanese Americans. Some move as far away from California as possible to places like New Jersey. An expression develops, "See you in New Jersey," representing their new freedom and new start somewhere else. In chapter 18, Woody visits his Japanese grandmother in Japan outside Hiroshima as a U.S. soldier occupying a conquered country. He learns some things about his family roots, which was doing well before the war. His grandmother shows him a tombstone with his father's name on it. The family thought he was dead. Woody makes some personal connections from the visit that help him understand himself and his family better. In chapter 19, Papa Wakasuki is excited about leaving Manzanar. The literary luminary chooses this quote to describe Papa and the family leaving the camp. He was drinking all the way past Mojave and into the northern suburbs of Los Angeles. There he suddenly sobered up, and his mood began to match what mine had been since we drove out the main gate, as if what we had all been dreading so long was finally to appear at any moment without warning. A burst of machine gun fire, or a row of Burma Shave signs saying, "Japs, go back where you came from." It took them 4 days to make the move back to Long Beach. When they arrive, they find that all their stored possessions had been unaccountably robbed from storage, and there was no record of Dad's 2 fishing boats. Dad would never recover from that loss. In chapter 20, Jeannie describes the tortures of trying to reintegrate into the American society she had already been born into before Japan waged war against the United States. In Jeannie's first day in 6th grade, she read a passage aloud. A pretty blonde girl in front of me said quite innocently at the reading, "Gee, I didn't know you could speak English." Soon that girl named Radine became her best friend. In time, Jeannie discovers that her true shame and her true fear was of not being accepted as an American because she is Japanese by ancestry. The connector in Group 7 shares his personal connection with Jeannie in this chapter. A connection I made with Jeannie was that she was the first one of her family to marry outside her own race. How I relate to this is that on my mom's side of the family, my grandfather is the first of her family to marry a white woman. The summarizer writes, "Life for Jeannie was very difficult. She was denied admission into the Girl Scouts because of her heritage, and many parents did not approve of their children's friendship with her. To compensate, she tries to become as American as possible. The more Jeannie tries to portray herself as a typical girl from the United States, the more her father wants to draw her into her Japanese culture." In chapter 21, the next to the last chapter of the book, Jeannie struggles to fit into American society and to find her own authentic identity and voice. The summarizer describes her ordeal. Jeannie embraces her friendship with Radine. Knowing they both grew up in an ethnically mixed ghetto, they were seen as almost socially equal, and they became best friends. They were friends for a very long time until they moved to Long Beach Polytechnic High School, when suddenly everything changed. Radine was eventually asked to be song girl in the band, but Jeannie's name, even being brought up to the administration, would end up in a fight. One day, Jeannie comes home to find her father nearly killed himself while he was drunk on whiskey and homemade wine, but he finally gives up drinking and started farming again. The family moved to the Santa Clara Valley outside of San Jose to find land for strawberry farming. Jeannie is a senior in high school and tries to start over. She is nominated to be a carnival queen. On election day, she dressed up in an exotic sarong with her hair down and a hibiscus flower behind her ear. At the ceremony, she wore a different, sedate dress and realizes it is not who she really is. She decides they voted for somebody I wanted to be and I wasn't. In the final chapter of the book, Jeannie returns to Manzanar years later. She is married, has her own children, and is established in a career. She realized that the camp experience had left her with shame, and she wanted acceptance. But finding an authentic self was going to be hard. She couldn't imitate something. She writes, "I needed some grounding of my own, such as Woody had found when he went to visit Aunt Toyo." She would become the first of her family to graduate from college and marry outside their race. During her visit to Manzanar, she pondered the memorial obelisk there that is a memorial to the dead. It seemed, she wrote, as if some block of stone had fallen from the peaks above and landed upright in the brush, chiseled, solitary, 20 feet tall. She studied the rock gardens families had made near their homes at Manzanar. These rock gardens, she wrote, had outlived the barracks and the towers and would surely outlive the asphalt road and the rusted pipes and the shattered slabs of concrete. Each stone was a mouth speaking for a family. She felt she could hear those voices grow as she walked to the firebreak area, and at last she recalled her dad and her inheritance from him. When they left Manzanar, he insisted on buying whatever kind of car he could afford because he did not want to be taken by the same buses that had brought him there back to Long Beach. He was a better man than that, he felt. From his honorable samurai family in Japan to his fishing business in Long Beach, he had shown that he was an honorable and capable provider, a man with skills and not a prisoner of war. She recalled him driving crazily from Manzanar, shouting to the others, "No bus for us! No bus for us!" as the others waited for the buses. She could feel his defiance as they left the horrid camp for good and forever to try and recover the lives they were forced to give up.